you feel comfortable emphasizing in your costume. So try not to fight your body, try and work with it. I think we can all attest to lots of research. I research constantly. I do a lot of historical stuff. That's where mine starts. I know you have a completely different research technique.
I gather a lot of different things. So for my cosplays, for example, because I find doing off the bat cosplay is kind of boring because everyone's doing it. I like to mash up a couple of different variations. So I will get as many different versions as I can, and I will design my own version from as many different angles as possible. So for example, if any of you have seen me as Lady Loki, I combine details from the movie version. So I have the movie version coattails on the Victorian bodice and full-length train. So it's little details like that. So when it comes to something like that, I do reference a lot of historical materials, see what has been done, what can be done, and what can I get away with, and still speaks this character.
Also, another good thing is to, of course, research techniques that you might not be familiar with. Like Jane and I have very different styles of what we actually do, and so her techniques in casting and molding, I mean, those are some really foreign things to me, so of course I would go ask her. But of course, do your research ahead of time so that you know what you're getting yourself into.
Give yourself a couple months.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, especially if you're looking for alternate materials, and don't be afraid to combine tons of different materials, you want to be able to figure out the look that you want, so sort of bravery that you want. And sometimes, especially for Google image search, I use that a lot when I'm looking for materials that I don't know the name of, but I know in my head what I'm looking for. So just go back and keep looking. And the search results will change every now and then as things get uploaded or popular items turn up towards the first couple of results.
So start with good measurements. I think all of us can attest to the fact that you really need to have very accurate measurements of your body, and be honest. Be honest with yourself. Be honest. And because if you don't start with really great measurements, you're going to get to that fitting stage and it's all going to fall apart and you're going to be devastated. So definitely, and if you can, have a friend help you.
Have a friend help you take your measurements. When you move and turn to measure yourself, it distorts your body, and you can't pull that tape the right tension around your bust while you're reaching for it yourself. It's crucial to be accurate. Otherwise, Dodie has already said, once you hit fitting, you'll essentially have to start over, and that's not what you want. Take the right measurements. Take more measurements than you think you're going to need. But it's often more than you'll see in the back of a pattern. When I do measurements for a custom garment, I take 22 measurements. Where if you're looking at the back of a commercial pattern, they're going to ask you for chest, waist, and hip. So sometimes neck on that. But take the measurements, take neck to back. Figure out on the pattern before you even start cutting a mock-up. Is this pattern going to be long? Is it going to be way too big? You can guess that if you have accurate, honest, real measurements as your starting point. It's really very, very important.
The other thing, of course, is if you're using any kind of outrageous foundation garments, like a corset is a great example, take your measurements over your corset. And one of the things I do is that I cinch my corset down to a very specific point because it can change so dramatically. So I have up to a 10-inch difference from my uncorseted to corseted waist. If I use my tightest measurement, but I'm really only comfortable at, 2 inches shy of that, then, I'm going to be kind of in a tough spot because you do need to be comfortable. But most importantly, make sure your measurements are consistent and make sure you take them over your foundation garments, every foundation garment.
And along the same lines, think about what you're going to do in your costume. If you're going to be doing like that wonderful girl yesterday and flipping around on stage, you need to consider that. You might need a little bit more room in the shoulders to be able to put your shoulders completely over your head and put your butt over your head without ripping it. Trust me, I've been to events where I've ripped out my back in the seaming, even though I double seamed it and used tape, it blew out because of the actions I was doing. Consider your props. If your props are going to be moving around a whole lot, or they're very heavy, you might want to take a measurement with your biceps completely flexed instead of I'm just having them at my side, because that will change how much movement and easement you're going to have in your costume.
Next up, we kind of already talked about this. Find a costuming buddy. My best friend and I, we work together a lot, and you don't have to be at the same skill level by any means. She and I went to college together, and we worked together, and we at similar levels. But even if it's just a friend you can rely on to come and take your measurements and help you with fitting a little bit, and you can tell them what to do, then it doesn't really matter who it is, but just someone who you can rely on.
I'm lucky. I have a business partner, and so she and I do a lot of fittings for each other and for our clients. But if I didn't have that, I used to reach out to my mom. She's the only person I knew at the time who could sew it all. And having somebody else, again, partly because when you turn to look and see if that fits in the mirror, that's going to change the way it hangs on your body. Having somebody who can pin that to the right place while you stand still and in a natural position, that's almost impossible to do for yourself. And plus, it's more fun with a friend. So find someone who likes to do this with you.
Use the best materials you can afford. Now, I say this, it's not use the best materials out there, it's what you can afford. Some of us can afford, sculpting something out of paper or cardboard. Some of us can use really fancy plastics. Some of us can use silk. Some of us can use cotton. It doesn't really matter, but research your materials and use the best ones you can actually physically afford. Don't go broke. Please don't go broke. I don't want to be responsible for that, and I don't want to be responsible for that. But be realistic, and especially when you're sewing, quality materials really do make a difference. Cotton, silk, wool, linen, there's a reason why so many, especially historical costumers, use those beyond just their historical history. So they're really fun to work with.
Also keep an eye out for linens at the thrift store. They're a wonderful source.
Yes.
Also, certain types of skirts can be a great source for fabric.
I use bed skirts, along the really fancy bed skirts you can see down at Goodwill that nobody touches. Those make great layered skirts for steampunk and whatnot, because you don't need all that cotton in the middle, but that heavyweight fabric that would cost you $18 a yard at Joann's, you just pay $2 for it, and you're gonna get your whole skirt out of it.
And it's all already gathered for you. It's great.
And sometimes they have lace on it.
Mm-hmm.
So carefully consider the pros and cons of your materials. Pros and cons of your materials?
Oh, sure.
This is someone else's.
Okay, so if you go with the cheaper fabrics, if you go with maybe some layers of cotton, is it something that needs structure? On my gauntlet, I have these really heavy surgical instruments. They're real heavy. The first time I made these, I only did a single layer of what I call Naga Beast. Everybody knows what that is, that Naga hide, fake looking leather stuff. And within 2 hours of the event, the weight of my syringes were pulling it down. So I had to, this morning, reback it, do some more interfacing and all that stuff. Had I just gone and sprung the first time I made them for a better material, I could have saved myself a heck of a lot of headache and 3 different iterations of the same gauntlets. So it ended up costing me more in the long run to use the cheaper material. So, but I also had to buy special needles for my machine because I broke my machine doing it. So consider your tools too.
Also, think about the opacity of materials. So for one of my cosplays, it's a white gown. And so the primary fabric is kind of transparent. And figure that out before you start a project. Hold it up to the light. What does it do? How does it drape? Do you need to back it? What's the weave like? So if it's a looser weave, most likely you'll have to back it or seal the edges somehow, guaranteed. Because the worst thing that you could do is just have this trailing thread developing because the edge is just unraveling inside and you're going to put yourself on eventually.
On the flip side of this, also You know, for me, example, my gown is silk, and I love it, it's beautiful, but oh my God, every time someone comes near me, I get a little bit of a heart attack because silk is very not washable. And so also consider those kinds of things in the sense that you're going to be likely at a convention. How upset are you going to be if someone does spill something on your costume? Granted, ideally we don't do that, but how upset are you going to be if you spent 100 hours on a costume and something happens? Ooh, dress forms. Buy or make a dress form. I personally purchased one off of Amazon for $200. If you're really serious about costuming and you have the space, do it. You will not regret it. Or make a dress form. There are tutorials for
Duct tape dress forms.
Duct tape or paper tape forms work great. I also have a professional dress form. The pricing goes up on professional dress forms incrementally, and the break point is a size 12. So I bought a size 12, but I have a paper tape form that I just kind of shove over that, so I have one that's shaped like me too. And a lot of my sample stuff I make in that size 12 because I have an ideal form for that. That form, I know what measurements that form has when I put out for, when I'm doing shoots, I can just include that in my model request. But I'm not always making for other people. I like to sew for myself. And having a form to do that, it saves me tons and tons of time and heartache.
So you know that Joann's coupon, that 60% off thing? You can buy a dress form with that. I paid $100 for mine. It's a $300 dress form because I use the 75% off coupon and my military discount.
Yeah. If you have, you know, like your parents or something, or, you know, your spouse who wants to give you a really great Christmas present or something, that's the way to go. I got my industrial iron that way. It's awesome.
I love my industrial iron.
Oh. Err on the side of too large.
Yes, when you're fitting, it's better, it just generally makes common sense that it's easier to size things in, to take stuff in than to let it out. If you make a fitter and it doesn't fit because it's too small, you'd start over. But if you work a size up, then you can tailor it. You can size it in 1/4 inch at the shoulder and 2 inches at the waist, or vice versa. But you'll only be able to do that if you have the extra room to work. When you buy off-the-rack clothes, it's sometimes smart to buy too large there too, because you can take it to a tailor. But if you buy too small, no doubts. Making your own stuff is exactly the same.
And something I really like to do along the same lines is, so if I have something a lot larger, I can put in darts anywhere I want. And so something that I've had several patterns be like this, and I will make the form and it is a bag. That's all it is, and it does not look nice and would not look nice on anyone. So just put in some darts, tailor it, and all of a sudden I have this really nice professional looking piece. And I will do this to off-the-rack items as well.
Next up, make a mock-up. I want to ask quickly, who knows what a mock-up is? Yay! So, Lori, do you want to tell everyone what a mock-up is?
Yes, we've mentioned them all along as we've talked about this, but a mock-up, when you're getting ready to sew an item from scratch, make one first out of cheap material so that you can do your fitting ahead of time without cutting into or sewing on your fashion fabric. It's a sort of the carpenter's axiom. Measure twice, cut once. Although in sewing, that's, you may cut twice because you're going to make one out of muslin or thrift store find or something cheap. Use a material that's similar to the fashion fabric you're going to use, otherwise your results won't be true. But having that experience of understanding how your pieces are going to fit together and how they're going to fit against your body is invaluable. In the industry, I send stuff out to factories for production. To do that, first I make a test out of muslin, and then I'm going to make up my pattern. I'm going to then make it again in each of my sizes and have people wear it. Those are all mock-ups before I send my pattern to production. And if I don't do that, it's going to cost me money. It's going to cost me a huge amount of time, and a huge amount of heartbreak as I deal with customers who aren't happy with how their garment looks. It's incredibly important to take that time and having the experience of sewing something ahead before you work in your final fabric.
The other part of that is it's a good opportunity to figure out what your actual directions are if you're reading a pattern, because they're not always easy to understand. So that first time when you do a mock-up, it's great to be able to get through and actually know what they're talking about and before you cut your good fabric. I thought I saw a hand question.
Yeah, I just kind of had a question, but sort of answered. You said you make a muslin mock-up before you do the patterning?
Yes.
Oh, okay. But she also said you could do it the other way around.
It's a little different when you're doing, Lori does.
I do production work.
Production, actual commercial, as opposed to like in my particular case, I'm just costuming for myself and individual people. So I usually do a mock-up and then fit and then move on from there. And then, of course, there's another thing called draping, which we're not really going to talk about because that's...
It's a bit of a misnomer to say I do it before I make my pattern. I've made a handmade pattern. It's before I make my pattern, before I digitize my pattern to send to the factory, before I do my...
And also, if you make a good mock-up, depending on what it is, you have another article of clothing. So, like some of the shirts I've made, I can just finish off the edges and have a new shirt, and you can dye it. So,
So I took the curtains and bed sheeting and all that stuff to do my mock-ups, and it looks crazy because the patterns don't match and they're mismatched and they're crazy. And at the threshold points, like right here, when you make your arms go out, your rib cage gets bigger in size type thing. I put pins in there so I can move it around and move the pins around and change it. And then I sew that part. Everything else is sewn. The parts that aren't going to move or be changed with movement. And I threw my mock-ups like all in a trash bag, and my husband pulled them out one day and finished where the pins were and wore them as a weirded scarecrow or something. It was the craziest costume ever, and everybody thought he was a genius. And he's like, dude, I sew people up for a living. I don't do this. This is my way. And she had too much alcohol when she made it. But using the pinning helps during the mock-up process. If you know it's going to be a point that you're going to have to move a stitch, don't stitch it. You don't have to, because you're going to move that thing around.
A lot of couture gowns are done that way, so that, those high fashion runway gowns, a lot of them are actually basted in place. Basting is a loose type of stitching, and then they'll go back and actually do the final stitching, usually by hand, which I find crazy sometimes. But moving on, pre-wash your fabrics. Most of the time you can do this, like in my particular case, the silk, I don't pre-wash my silk. I do, steam iron it to try and get some of the stuff out, but so many fabrics out there have stabilizers and starch and all kinds of nasty stuff, and you want to get all of that shrinking out before you make your garment, even pre-washing your muslin. It is really, really important.
and separate your darts from lines, because it's going to run. That is the time it's going to run.
Yeah.
So you mentioned steaming. If you have a fabric that isn't washable, that's really important. And one place that I highly recommend that you can also dip in hot water for some stuff that can't be tumbled.
Mm-hmm.
That's really important that you do that, not just with your fashion fabric, but with interfacing. Steam shrink or hot dip your interfacing to make sure it is also pre-shrunk. Because if you wash that garment and they shrink 2 different amounts, it sucks.
And your trims if you can. If it's not a plastic, do that too. I actually, stupidly, this was quite a while ago, I did that. I made a vest for my husband with some strapping material. And the strapping material didn't shrink because it wasn't cotton, but the cotton shrunk. It did not look so good after that. It was a very bad experience.